In the heart of Ohio, far from the bustling cities and well-trodden paths, stood an abandoned amusement park. Once a place of joy, laughter, and childhood memories, the park now lay in ruins, forgotten by time and overshadowed by the thick trees that had slowly overtaken it. The rusting Ferris wheel loomed like a giant skeleton, its once vibrant colors faded into a dull, sickly hue. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the only sounds were the whispers of the wind and the distant calls of crows. The once pristine grounds, filled with the echoes of children's laughter, now held only the silence of the forgotten. The park had been left to rot, its attractions abandoned, its paths overgrown with weeds, and its once bright signs now faded and peeling. A sense of loss clung to the place, a feeling that something had been torn away, leaving only the remnants of a happier time. But there was something else here, something darker, lurking beneath the surface. Local legends spoke of the park's dark past, of strange disappearances and inexplicable occurrences that had plagued the grounds in the years leading up to its closure. Some said it was cursed, others whispered of a vengeful spirit that haunted the place. But no one could explain why the park had been abandoned so suddenly. It had once been a thriving business, drawing families from all over the state. But then, one summer night, it had all come to an abrupt end. The gates had been locked, the rides had stopped, and the laughter had vanished as quickly as it had come. No one knew what had happened, but the town never spoke of it, as if the park had never existed at all. Those who had worked there, those who had once called it their home, had all vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the crumbling remnants of what had once been. A group of friends, drawn by curiosity and the allure of the unknown, decided to venture into the park one cold autumn evening. They had heard the stories, of course, but like many before them, they dismissed them as mere superstition. With flashlights in hand and cameras ready, they crossed the rusted gates, unaware of the terror that awaited them. The air was cold, biting at their skin as they stepped into the park, the crunch of dead leaves beneath their feet echoing in the stillness. The park seemed to watch them, its empty eyes staring from the rusted rides and broken attractions. They laughed nervously, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease that crept up their spines. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a faint whisper, almost like a voice calling out to them. They tried to ignore it, but the feeling lingered, like a weight pressing down on their chests. The group made their way past the decaying carousel, its once joyful music box tunes long silenced. The horses, now faded and chipped, seemed to stare at them with hollow eyes. The sight sent a chill down their spines, but they pressed on, eager to see more. They passed the old roller coaster, its tracks twisted and bent, like the bones of a long-dead creature. The air grew heavier with each step, and the park seemed to close in around them, its shadows stretching and shifting in the corners of their vision. They didn't know it yet, but they had crossed a threshold, stepping into a place where the past and present were no longer separate, where the horrors of the park's history were about to come alive. As they walked deeper into the park, the ground beneath their feet became uneven, the pavement cracked and broken. The scent of mildew and decay grew stronger, mixing with the earthy smell of rotting leaves. The friends tried to laugh it off, but the unease was palpable now, thick and suffocating. They found themselves standing in front of the old Funhouse, a towering structure that seemed to loom over them like a dark sentinel. Its once bright colors had faded into a sickly gray, and the entrance was shrouded in darkness. The door, slightly ajar, creaked as the wind pushed against it, inviting them inside. Despite the foreboding atmosphere, one of the friends, eager to explore, pushed the door open, and the others, though hesitant, followed. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped, the cold biting at their skin. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay was overpowering. The walls were covered in peeling paint, the images of twisted, nightmarish figures staring down at them. The mirrors, once polished to a shine, were now cracked and dirty, reflecting only distorted, warped images of the group. The floor creaked beneath their feet, and the faint sound of whispers seemed to echo from the dark corners of the room. It was as though the building itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The friends moved cautiously through the hallways, their flashlights flickering in the darkness. Every step they took seemed to bring them deeper into the heart of the nightmare, where reality and illusion blurred together. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to close in on them. The hallway stretched on endlessly, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. The mirrors reflected images that didn't match what was in front of them. The laughter of children, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the halls, though no children were there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if something or someone was calling out to them from the darkness. Panic began to set in as the group realized they were lost. The Funhouse, once a place of amusement, had become a maze of terror, its corridors shifting and changing, leading them deeper into the unknown. The floor beneath their feet seemed to buckle and sway, as if the building itself was alive, its heartbeat pounding in their ears. They turned a corner and found themselves face to face with a large mirror, but this one was different. It was covered in grime and dirt, its surface streaked with something that looked disturbingly like blood. The reflection that stared back at them was not their own. It was twisted, distorted, as if the mirror had captured something else entirely, something that was not of this world. The friends froze, unable to look away, as the reflection in the mirror began to move on its own. It smiled at them, a slow, malicious grin that spread across its face like a predator savoring its prey. The air grew colder, and the whispers became clearer. Now a voice, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. One of the friends, a skeptic who had been dismissive of the stories, stepped forward to touch the glass. His hand made contact with the mirror, and for a moment, nothing happened. But then, with a sudden, violent jolt, a cold, clammy hand shot out from the mirror, grabbing his wrist with an unnatural strength. His scream was cut short as he was yanked forward, his body jerking violently as if pulled by some invisible force. The others screamed in terror, trying to pull him back, but it was as if the mirror had a grip on him, pulling him deeper into its depths. The mirror seemed to ripple, its surface shifting like water, and the friend's body was pulled toward it, his feet dragging across the floor. His face contorted in fear as he tried to break free, but it was no use. The others tried to help, but their hands slipped off his body as if he were submerged in something cold and slick. The funhouse seemed to close in around them, the walls shifting and twisting as if the building itself was alive, hungry, and waiting for more. The friends' screams echoed through the hallways, but they were drowned out by the deafening silence that followed. The others could only watch in horror as he disappeared into the mirror, his body swallowed whole by the dark reflection. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the mirror was calm again, its surface smooth and untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. The remaining friends stood frozen in place, their minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The terror they felt was beyond anything they had ever experienced. Their friend, who had been standing beside them just moments ago, was now gone, swallowed by the very mirror they had dared to touch. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. They turned to each other, eyes wide with fear, their faces pale in the dim light of their flashlights. It felt as though the very walls of the funhouse were closing in around them, the air thick with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Panic began to set in, but they knew they couldn't just stand there. They had to move, had to find a way out before whatever had taken their friend claimed them as well. But as they turned to leave, the hallway before them seemed to stretch out impossibly long, the doors and exits now hidden from view. The mirrors along the walls reflected twisted images, each one more distorted than the last. Their own faces, stared back at them, but they were wrong, slightly off, as if the reflection was mocking them, showing them versions of themselves that weren't quite real. It was as though the mirrors were playing tricks on their minds, warping reality and feeding on their fear. Every time they looked away, the reflections seemed to change, becoming darker, more sinister. And then, from the corner of the room, they heard it, the faint sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer with each passing second. The friends froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. They turned toward the sound, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew, louder, closer, until they could almost feel the presence of something behind them, just out of sight. One of the friends, the bravest of the group, turned to face the sound, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "It's just the wind," he said, his voice trembling. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. The air was too still, too thick with the weight of something unnatural. The footsteps grew louder, now unmistakably human, but there was no one in sight. Panic surged through the group, and they began to move, stumbling through the hallways of the funhouse, their flashlights flickering as they tried to find an exit. But no matter how far they ran, the hallways seemed to stretch on forever, each turn leading them deeper into the maze. The mirrors seemed to follow them, reflecting their every move, distorting their faces, their bodies, until they no longer recognized themselves. And then, just as they thought they couldn't take it anymore, they heard the voice, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all around them. It was a voice they didn't recognize, but it carried with it an unmistakable sense of malice. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, the words echoing in their minds, sending a chill down their spines. The friends froze, unable to move, their hearts pounding in their chests. The voice continued, its tone mocking, cruel. "You're too late. There's no way out." The walls seemed to shift, the hallway twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with each passing second. It felt as though the very building itself was alive, its walls pulsing with a dark energy that fed on their fear. They had entered a nightmare, and there was no waking. Up from it, the friends stumbled backward, their eyes wide with terror, but there was nowhere to go. The walls seemed to close in around them, the mirrors reflecting their every movement, their every breath. The voice grew louder, now joined by others, a chorus of whispers that echoed through the funhouse. It was as if the building itself had come alive, feeding on their fear, growing stronger with each passing second. The friends could feel the darkness closing in on them, suffocating them, as if the very air was thick with malevolent intent. They turned frantically, trying to find an exit, but every door they opened led to another hallway, another dead end. The mirrors, once just reflections of their surroundings, now seemed to move of their own accord, twisting and shifting, showing them distorted versions of themselves, versions that were wrong, that didn't belong. They could no longer tell what was real and what was a trick of the mind. And then, one by one, they began to hear it. The sound of footsteps behind them, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. It was as if something was following them, something that wasn't human, something that had been waiting for them to arrive. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind them. But when they turned around, there was nothing there. It was as if the very darkness had come alive, taking shape, stalking them in the shadows. The friends ran, their footsteps echoing through the halls. But no matter how fast they moved, they couldn't escape. The darkness was everywhere, closing in on them, suffocating them. Desperation set in as the friends realized they were trapped. The funhouse had become a labyrinth of horrors, its walls shifting and twisting, its mirrors reflecting only their deepest fears. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of whispers filled the space, growing louder, more insistent. The darkness seemed to have a mind of its own, following them, watching them. They turned a corner, And for a moment they thought they saw a way out. A door that wasn't there before, a faint light flickering through the cracks. But as they rushed toward it, the door slammed shut, and the light vanished. They were back, where they started, lost in the endless maze of the funhouse. The whispers had become voices now, clear and distinct, each one telling them something different, something horrifying. "You shouldn't have come," one voice hissed. "You're not meant to be here," another whispered. "We've been waiting for you," a third voice crooned. The friends stumbled backward, their hearts racing, their minds unraveling. They had crossed a line, entered a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. The funhouse was no longer just a building. It was alive, a living, breathing entity that fed on fear, that trapped its victims in an endless nightmare. The friends could feel their grip on reality slipping away as the voices grew louder, more insistent. And then, just as they thought they couldn't take it anymore, they saw it. Something moving in the shadows, something that wasn't human. It was tall, its form distorted, its face hidden in darkness. But its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and as they locked onto the friends, they felt a wave of terror wash over them. The creature moved toward them, its footsteps, silent but heavy, as if the very ground trembled beneath its weight. The friends turned and ran, their legs burning with exhaustion. But no matter how fast they moved, the creature was always right behind them. The funhouse seemed to stretch on forever, its walls shifting and twisting, trapping them in a never-ending nightmare. The creature's presence grew stronger, its eyes burning with malice, its footsteps echoing in the darkness. The friends could hear its breath now, a low guttural sound that sent chills down their spines. They were running out of time, running out of hope. And then, just as they thought they couldn't run any longer, they saw it. The exit. A door at the far end of the hall, bathed in a flickering light. They sprinted toward it, their hearts pounding in their chests, their minds screaming for escape. But as they reached the door, they felt a cold hand on their shoulder pulling them back. They turned to see the creature, its face now visible, a twisted, contorted visage of darkness and malice. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. "You should have never come," it whispered, its voice low and guttural. The friends screamed, but it was too late. The funhouse had claimed them, and they were trapped in its dark, twisted world forever.